Okay, before I get murdered, this is a collab with LewisFilms where we give different perspectives on certain topics. Since I'm the negative one, let's talk about why Spectacular Spider-Man Season 3 shouldn't happen. Now, before you write me an essay, both Lewis and I want Spectacular Spider-Man to happen. But should it? That's what we're going to look at today. Alright, let's keep it real. Let's say tomorrow they announce the revival of Spectacular Spider-Man. Season 3 will happen, and most of the original cast will return. The hype will be astronomical. People will literally cry when this happens. Marvel Animation is finally doing it. Then we wait, and wait. Eventually things die down, and then we get a trailer for it. And then there's something off. The story just doesn't line up. The animation is not how you remember. You're still excited, don't get me wrong, but something just doesn't feel the same. I compare it to some of the reactions I've seen for X-Men 97. Everyone's excited, but we know it won't recapture the same feeling as the original show. And it might be the same here. No matter what they do, no matter how they do it, you're not going to feel the same about the show as you did when you watched as a kid. In my last video where I talked about why Spider-Man fans hate Spider-Man, I boiled it down to how you feel about Spider-Man. That's how you're going to react to new versions of him, because the character keeps changing and evolving. To add to that, the world around us keeps changing. The world when Spectacular Spider-Man came out is a vastly different one from the one today, and that will be reflected in the show. It's not far off to expect that should Spectacular Spider-Man come back, it will start to take elements from the more mainstream versions of the character, such as the MCU Spider-Man, because brand synergy has always and will always be important for Marvel. They want to remind you of the MCU to sell you more things, both MCU and Spectacular wise. Now, this is assuming Marvel Animation is the one making the show, but let's say somehow Sony is able to bring back the show. It could be largely the same thing. Sony recently has shown troubling signs that they want everything to connect through the Spider-Verse. And I hate this because that would mean Spectacular Spider-Man, instead of being a consistent standalone experience, could get bogged down with trying to make it work with the Miguel stuff in Spider-Verse, or even bring in elements from the awful Sonyverse movies into the show. And before you say they would never do that, it's not like Spectacular Spider-Man hasn't done that before. There are plenty of instances in the show where they take elements from the Raimi movies and give it their own twist. Most times for the better, but that was in a world where Sony wasn't obsessed with making a cinematic universe, and Marvel's brand synergy wasn't as annoying as it is now. To put it simply, is it worth bringing back Spectacular Spider-Man if it means it could become a tool for a corporation to push a money-making machine? And while it has always been like that, back when the show first came out, it was less forceful than it is now. I mean, think about it. As soon as Disney got the rights to do a Spider-Man show, what was the first thing they did? They made the show all about the wider Marvel Universe, to push for this MCU adjacent narrative. You can see that in shows like Avengers Assemble, and even when they rebooted the Spider-Man show with Marvel Spider-Man, they made it even more adjacent to the MCU. And while we haven't seen that with Sony, we are starting to see them push for making things more like Into the Spider-Verse, but in live action. As recently, Sony has started to talk to Nicolas Cage about bringing Spider-Man Noir into the new Sony show and turning Silk into a more male-driven experience. Is it really worth bringing back such a beloved show just to watch it become bastardized time and time again? And going back to my other video, the moment a revived Spectacular Spider-Man does anything remotely or slightly lower quality, the exact moment that happens, this fandom will turn on it as well, because the climate of the world is just far too different. Hell, should it even attempt to talk real world issues that relate to people just like how the original Spider-Man was intended to be, the moment they do that, we'll get like 5 million videos calling Spectacular Spider-Man woke propaganda. And honestly, if this is the world Spectacular Spider-Man will come into, maybe it's best it never comes back. Basically what I'm trying to say is this world is so different and so much more difficult than the one where Spectacular Spider-Man first came out in, that it'll be hard to nurture a show that isn't contaminated with a bunch of other things. Whether it be Sony or Marvel's attempts to push a market, or other people who want to use everything as a political agenda. Do we really want the show we want to get bogged down in this corporate political landscape that is constantly changing and seems to get worse because everybody thinks if there's one black character in the show, it's woke propaganda. And my final point is, why go back to Spectacular Spider-Man when we can just move forward? The Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon and people shifting reactions to it proved to me that it doesn't matter what the chatter is in the moment. Give it a few years, people will love it, and sure, that argument can be used for Spectacular Spider-Man Season 3 should people turn on it, but we honestly should just move on. It sucks, the show was left on a cliffhanger. But so did the 90s show, and that, in my opinion, has had a way bigger cultural impact than Spectacular Spider-Man, which in reality only impacted the fandom, not the larger perception of the character. So why spend our energy on this show that has a strong cult following, sure, but why not just move on to the next Spider-Man show? Put all our energy into supporting Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man instead of vilifying it and then comparing it to Spectacular Spider-Man while hoping it one day comes back. Let's move the character forward instead of going back and try to recapture a feeling we know the people who grew up with Spectacular Spider-Man will never get again. We're not kids anymore. We love this character, sure. We would love this Season 3 to happen just to wrap up the story. But life is different. Sometimes it's better to look at the past and say what could have been than to get what we want and then say what should have been. You know, this video was really hard to make because I really want Spectacular Spider-Man Season 3. But, you know, I got the short end of the straw and I had to make the negative video. So, yeah. I'd love for it to happen, but I still think my points are correct. I'm not turning on my own opinion.